As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the bustling city of Jerusalem, Jesus made his way toward the city gates. The air was thick with excitement, filled with the sounds of people preparing for the Passover. Pilgrims had traveled from far and wide, bringing with them their hopes and dreams, their prayers for freedom, and their longings for peace. Yet, amidst the lively chatter, there was a weight in the air, a heaviness that only Jesus could fully comprehend. As he approached the Mount of Olives, Jesus paused, looking out over the sprawling city before him. The majestic temple gleamed in the distance, a symbol of God's presence among his people. Yet, as Jesus gazed at Jerusalem, his heart broke. Tears streamed down his face, and he began to weep. His disciples, who followed closely behind, were taken aback. They had seen him perform miracles, teach with authority, and display compassion, but this was different. Why was their teacher crying? The disciples exchanged worried glances. They loved this city, this holy place, and yet Jesus spoke of its destruction, of a terrible fate that was to come. They had heard him teach about peace, love, and forgiveness, but now he seemed to be warning of judgment. Jesus finally wiped his tears, standing tall but still burdened by sorrow. His compassion for Jerusalem was overwhelming, not because of the city's beauty or importance, but because he knew the hearts of the people within. Many had rejected his message, turning their backs on the peace he had come to bring. "Master," Peter whispered, stepping forward, "why do you cry for the city? Isn't it full of people who have praised your name?" Jesus turned to Peter, eyes full of deep sadness and love. "Peter," he said softly, "it is not just about their praise. They do not see the truth. They do not recognize that I am here, that God's salvation has come to them. And because of this, great suffering will come upon them." The disciples were quiet, struggling to absorb the weight of his words. The city that had welcomed Jesus with shouts of joy was the same city that would soon turn against him. He knew the path ahead, his betrayal, his suffering, and his death. And he wept not just for Jerusalem, but for all who would miss the chance to find peace in him. With a voice filled with sorrow, Jesus spoke, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it is hidden from your eyes." He could see beyond the present moment, foreseeing the turmoil that awaited the city. He spoke of a time when enemies would surround Jerusalem, and the destruction that would come upon it. Jesus was not weeping for himself, but for the people who would reject him, for those who would turn away from the peace he offered. He lamented for a city that had long awaited its Messiah yet was blind to his presence among them. "Your enemies will encircle you and tear you to the ground," he foretold, his voice trembling with emotion. In that moment, Jesus expressed the depth of his love for Jerusalem and its people, knowing that many would miss the opportunity for redemption. His tears were a reflection of divine compassion, the heart of God breaking for a lost world. Jesus gathered his disciples in an upper room, away from the crowds, a place where they could share their last moments together in intimacy. As they entered the room, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Little did they know that this would be their final meal with him before his impending crucifixion. Jesus looked around the table at his closest friends, Peter, John, Judas, and the others. Each one had been handpicked by him to carry on his mission. As the meal began, Jesus took a loaf of bread, looked up to heaven, and gave thanks. He broke the bread, and with a gentle hand, he passed it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body given for you." Confusion washed over them. They could not grasp the significance of his words, but they accepted the bread, sensing something sacred in the air. Then, Jesus took a cup of wine, lifted it, and said, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." The gravity of his words hung in the air. He was revealing to them the essence of his mission. He was the Lamb of God, the ultimate sacrifice for their sins. The Passover meal took on new meaning as they realized that the ancient tradition was fulfilled in him. As the meal progressed, Jesus, knowing what lay ahead, looked at his disciples with deep sorrow. "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." A murmur swept through the room and the disciples exchanged uneasy glances. Each one began to question, "Is it I?" Judas, feeling the sting of conviction, asked, "Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi." Jesus replied quietly, "You have said so." The words pierced Judas's heart, a painful reminder of his treachery, but rather than repenting, he buried his shame beneath a facade of indifference. After they had eaten, a remarkable act unfolded that would leave an indelible mark on their hearts. Jesus, the teacher and the Lord, rose from the table, and in an unexpected turn of events, he removed his outer garment and wrapped a towel around his waist. The disciples watched in stunned silence, unsure of what he was doing. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash their feet. This was the task of a servant, the lowest position in the household. The disciples could hardly believe their eyes. When Jesus came to Peter, he protested, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" The thought of his master kneeling before him was too much to bear. Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." But Peter, ever impulsive, responded, "No, you shall never wash my feet." With a gentle but firm voice, Jesus said, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." Suddenly Peter realized the depth of what Jesus was offering. "Then Lord, not just my feet but my hands and my head as well," he exclaimed. Jesus smiled and replied, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet, their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." He was referring to Judas, who would betray him. When he finished washing their feet, he put on his garments and returned to the table. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked. The disciples listened intently, still grappling with the significance of his actions. Jesus continued, "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." In that moment, Jesus was redefining greatness in the kingdom of God. It was not about power or authority, but about serving others in love. His act of humility was a powerful reminder that true leadership is found in the willingness to serve. The disciples had witnessed the depth of his love and the nature of his mission, a mission that would soon lead him to the cross. As they concluded their meal, the reality of the events that would unfold in the coming hours loomed heavily over them. Jesus would be betrayed, arrested, and crucified. Yet, even in the face of such darkness, he had shown them the way of love and sacrifice. He had wept over Jerusalem, offered his body and blood as a sacrifice, and modeled humility by washing their feet. After the meal, they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives, where Jesus often sought solitude. The air was cool, and the night was quiet, but an unseen storm brewed in Judas's heart. As they walked, Jesus spoke of the trials to come, the challenges that lay ahead for his followers. He knew his time was short, and the weight of the world was upon him. "Tonight, you will all fall away," he warned, "for it is written, 'I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered.'" Peter, always bold, declared, "Even if all fall away, I will not." Jesus turned to Peter, his eyes filled with sadness. "Truly I tell you today, yes, tonight before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. Meanwhile, Judas lingered at the back, wrestling with his decision. As they approached the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus went further to pray, asking his disciples to stay awake and keep watch. Meanwhile, in the shadows, Judas made his way to the chief priests, clutching the silver coins tightly in his hand. The moment he had long contemplated was finally at hand. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard," he had told them. As Jesus returned from prayer, he found his disciples asleep, their eyes heavy with fatigue. "Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour?" he asked, filled with sorrow. He knew the moment of betrayal was near. Suddenly the sound of footsteps echoed through the garden, the clinking of armor and the rustling of torches. A group of soldiers led by Judas approached with torches blazing in the dark. Judas stepped forward, his heart racing, and with feigned affection, he approached Jesus. "Rabbi," he said, his voice steady yet trembling, and leaned in to kiss him, a signal to the guards. The kiss landed on Jesus's cheek, a moment that shattered the air with a deafening silence. "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" Jesus asked, his voice calm, revealing neither anger nor despair, only a profound sadness that pierced the night. The guards moved in, seizing Jesus as the disciples watched in horror. Peter, filled with rage and fear, drew his sword and struck the ear of the high priest's servant. "Enough," Jesus commanded, healing the man's ear with a touch. even in his own moment of crisis. As Judas stepped back, watching the chaos unfold, he felt the full weight of his betrayal crashing down upon him. The 30 pieces of silver seemed worthless compared to the love and grace that Jesus had shown him, but it was too late. The deed was done. As Jesus was led away, Judas stood in the shadows, a figure consumed by guilt and regret. He had traded the Son of God for silver, and now his heart was heavy with the realization of what he had lost. The kiss that was meant to signify loyalty had become the mark of his betrayal, and he would never be the same. In the darkness, Judas fled, the echoes of his choices reverberating in his mind. He had sealed his fate, and the weight of his actions would haunt him forever. In those moments, Jesus revealed the very heart of God, a heart that breaks for the lost, that sacrifices for others, and that serves in humility. As they left the upper room that night, the disciples carried with them the profound lessons of love, service, and sacrifice that would shape their lives and their mission for years to come. And so, the journey continued, with Jesus leading his disciples toward the ultimate act of love, the cross. In his tears, his words, and his actions, he showed them that love knows no boundaries, and that the path to true life is found in giving oneself away. In the end, they would understand that this was not just a story of betrayal and sorrow, but a story of redemption and hope, a hope that still resonates today, inviting us to follow the way of Jesus, the way of love.